You think you've seen it all? You think you've seen horror. You've binged crime docs on serial killers, watched medieval torture compilations on YouTube at 2 a.m., maybe even read a Reddit thread about the worst ways to die. But let's be honest, Western imagination has nothing on what the Chinese Empire came up with when it decided someone needed to be punished. Because in ancient China, execution wasn't just about ending your life. It was about erasing your very essence, dismembering your body and soul in a spectacle designed to terrify an entire population into obedience. Welcome to the world of Imperial Chinese justice, where death wasn't a punishment. It was just a finale. Let's rewind. The Chinese Empire, one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in human history, gave the world paper, printing, gunpowder, compasses, bureaucracy, Confucianism, noodles, and 1,000 reasons to fear authority. Dynasties rose and fell, emperors reigned like demigods, and social order was everything. Maintaining harmony wasn't just a nice philosophical goal. It was the backbone of political survival. And when someone disrupted that harmony, the consequences had to be so brutal, so vivid, that everyone who witnessed it would think twice before stepping out of line. That's where things got creative. Because Chinese law wasn't just strict. It was theatrical. This was a culture that took its legalism seriously. Punishment was performance. Justice was propaganda. And executions? Executions were carefully crafted works of terror. Now, don't get it twisted. Not every thief or cheater was dragged to a public square and diced like garlic. Most people who ran afoul of the law faced more standard, fair beatings, forced labor, exile, maybe a good old-fashioned beheading. But if your crime was considered especially heinous, like treason, patricide, or undermining the moral foundation of the empire, then you were in for something special, something operatic, something unforgettable. The imperial court had a whole menu of death: dismemberment, public humiliation, execution in slow motion, and all of it served a dual purpose: eliminate the offender and terrify the masses. These weren't just punishments. They were cautionary tales carved into flesh. And here's where it gets darkly fascinating. The Chinese Empire was obsessed with the idea of order. From Confucian ideals of filial piety and societal roles to legalist principles of harsh deterrence, every law and every punishment was designed to reinforce hierarchy. The emperor was the son of heaven, and any disruption of the order he governed was not just a crime against the state. It was a cosmic offense. That's why executions weren't private affairs. They were public events. Citizens were encouraged, sometimes even required, to attend. Children, elders, entire families. Imagine a Sunday market, but instead of fruit stands and street noodles, you're watching a man get disassembled like an IKEA shelf, piece by bloody piece. Also, everyone could go home and think, you know what? Maybe I won't steal that chicken. And the condemned? They weren't just killed. They were symbolically destroyed. Some were paraded through the streets in cages. Others were forced to confess their crimes publicly, often after being tortured into the truth. They might be mutilated before the final blow, or subjected to mock trials in front of crowds, where the verdict was always guilty and the sentence was always a horror show. But the crown jewel of imperial execution methods, the one that haunts history books and disturbed historians alike, was a little performance called Lingchi, death by 1,000 cuts. And trust me, that's not a metaphor. It was real, it was legal, and it was practiced well into the 20th century. It was so infamous, so grotesque, that even colonial powers like France and Britain, not exactly known for their human rights records at the time, wrote reports expressing horror at its existence. But we're not there yet. Before we dive into Lingchi and the other surgical nightmares the empire devised, it's worth asking, what kind of society creates such refined cruelty? And what does it say about us that we're still so fascinated by it? Because, spoiler alert, this isn't just a history lesson. It's a mirror. Modern justice may not include dismemberment, not officially anyway. But the hunger for public punishment, for moral theater, for watching someone suffer for their sins, that never left. It just went digital. So get comfortable. The knives haven't even touched the skin yet. Coming up next, the art, science, and spiritual logic behind death by 1,000 cuts. If you thought Chapter 1 was bad, you're going to need a stronger stomach. Lingchi, Death by 1,000 cuts. If you thought Chapter 1 was grim, buckle up. We're about to dive blade first into the most infamous execution method in Chinese imperial history. Lingchi, loosely translated as death by 1,000 cuts, wasn't just an act of killing. It was a slow, spiritual annihilation, a disassembly of body, soul, and identity done with ritualistic precision. It was designed to horrify not only the condemned, but everyone watching. It wasn't execution. It was obliteration. Imagine this. You're tied to a wooden frame in the center of a crowded marketplace. You're stripped, drugged with opium not for mercy, but to ensure you don't pass out too soon. There are children in the audience, vendors selling dumplings, scholars taking notes, a government official reading your crimes like it's open mic night. Then enters the executioner, not a butcher, but a trained technician of torment. The first cut is almost polite. A thin slice across the chest. Blood beads. The crowd murmurs. Then comes another. And another. Arms, legs, stomach. The cuts are small at first, almost surgical. You are alive, alert, forced to feel it all. Because that was the point. The audience needed to see the sinner suffer. You weren't just being punished. You were being made into a lesson. Lingchi could take hours. Some accounts speak of hundreds of cuts before the final. Mercy-filled stab to the heart. Others describe a condemned begging for death long before it arrived, only to be denied, because their death had to mean something. It had to be useful. Your pain was a form of public education, and it didn't stop at death. After the final blow, your body might be dismembered, your flesh sold or discarded, your name erased from family records, your afterlife denied, because according to Confucian beliefs, to be buried whole was essential for one's spirit to rest. Lingchi violated not just the body, but the eternal soul. You weren't just killed. You were spiritually exiled. What crimes earned such a fate? Treason, patricide, conspiracies against the emperor, anything that challenged the celestial hierarchy. In other words, if your crime made someone in power feel cosmically offended, you could be on the chopping block, literally. And yes, this wasn't a punishment buried in the ancient past. Lingchi was officially outlawed in 1905. Think about that. In the same century as airplanes, jazz, and motion pictures, people were still being publicly sliced apart as a form of justice. One of the most famous victims was Liu Jin, a powerful eunuch who amassed immense wealth and political power during the Ming Dynasty. Accused of corruption and plotting against the emperor, Liu Jin didn't just lose his job. He lost it one slice at a time. Accounts say over 3,000 cuts were administered. His death was a festival of horror, attended by thousands. The executioner was rewarded for making it last as long as possible. The crowd reportedly applauded. But even more disturbing, photographic evidence of Lingchi exists. When French soldiers and missionaries were stationed in China during the late Qing dynasty, some took photographs of these executions. Grainy, sepia-toned images of partially flayed bodies still circulate in academic archives. Proof that this wasn't legend. This was real, documented, systematized. Human. Let's take a second here. Imagine you're in line at Starbucks, scrolling your phone, and instead of cat videos, you see that pop up on your feed. Not as fiction, as policy, and people liked it, literally and emotionally. Because the psychological mechanism behind Lingchi still exists, the desire to see people suffer for their sins. It's the same instinct behind public shaming, cancel culture, viral takedowns. We just replaced the blade with bandwidth. In some ways, Lingchi never died. It evolved. We might not dismember people in town squares anymore, but the appetite for spectacle is still there. The hunger for punishment that isn't just punitive, but poetic. We want the downfall to feel earned, drawn out, satisfying. We want 1,000 cuts. Just digital ones. So next time you see a scandal trending, ask yourself, are we watching justice unfold, or are we just craving another slow execution? Coming up next, how China's imperial legal system turned public punishment into a moral theater, complete with actors, rituals, and stage directions. If you thought the executions were horrifying, wait till you see the script. Justice with the fragrance of blood, inside the imperial legal theater. You've seen the blade, now let's meet the bureaucracy. Because in the Chinese Empire, Execution wasn't some random act of rage from an emperor with a hangover. It was a final scene in a carefully written script. A ritual of blood choreographed by a system that believed social harmony was more important than mercy, and that harmony required ripping someone to pieces in front of their neighbors. So be it. This wasn't chaos. This was policy. And it was all managed by one of the most intricate legal machines in human history. Let's start with the philosophical engine behind this machine. Confucianism. You probably heard it praised in textbooks for promoting filial piety, respect for elders, and moral discipline. But what those books rarely mention is that Confucianism, when baked into state policy, could be used to justify some of the harshest punishments imaginable. The logic was simple. Society is a family. The emperor is a father. You disobey the father, you're not just being naughty, you're unbalancing the universe. And guess what rebalances it? That's right, public, symbolic, flesh-tearing punishment. Then comes legalism, Confucianism's colder, more sadistic cousin. Where Confucianism talked about morality, legalism talked about control. It argued that strict laws and even stricter punishments were the only way to keep a society in check. Combine these two ideologies, and what do you get? A moral-legal blender where executions are moral sermons carved into human skin. The imperial legal system was a vast apparatus with layers of magistrates, inspectors, scribes, and executioners. There were over 400 codified crimes punishable by death, and they weren't just murder and treason. Oh no, we're talking about crimes like speaking ill of the emperor's ancestors, writing subversive poetry, or mishandling grain quotas if you were a low-level bureaucrat. Because in the empire, disobedience wasn't just a crime, it was a virus. And justice was the scalpel. But here's where things get theatrical. Executions were more than law enforcement. They were public morality plays. The condemned became characters. The crowd, an audience. The executioner, a performer. Every detail was symbolic. The location was chosen for maximum visibility. The timing often aligned with festivals or seasonal rituals. Even the way a prisoner was dressed had meaning. Sometimes they were stripped to signify loss of status, other times dressed in ceremonial garb to show that they had been cleansed before death. And the trial? Oh, it wasn't a trial as we know it today. It was often a ritualized confession, guided and coerced by torture, documented by scribes, and reviewed by higher officials not to verify innocence, but to determine just how exemplary the punishment should be. If you were really lucky, you might get a sentence of death by beheading. Clean. Efficient, but if your crime was morally corrosive, welcome to the Dismemberment Express. The audience was a vital part of the spectacle. Government notices would be posted days in advance. Vendors would show up to sell snacks. Parents brought their kids to teach them a lesson. Students were encouraged to write about what they saw. Monks might chant. Officials stood by, ensuring order as the chaos unfolded. It was state-sponsored trauma, disguised as social order. Let's be clear, this wasn't a rogue dynasty or a fringe period. This was the norm for hundreds of years. From the Han to the Ming to the Qing dynasties, the logic remained constant. Public suffering equals political stability. Pain had pedagogical value. The body of the criminal was a blackboard on which the law wrote its final lesson. And just when you think it couldn't get darker, there was the concept of collective guilt. If you committed treason, your family could be punished too. Parents, siblings, children, some might be executed, others enslaved. Your house burned down, your name removed from ancestral tablets. Because morality wasn't individual, it was communal. If you polluted the pond, everyone drank poison, and the state would make sure everyone paid for it. Now let's talk about rituals. Before an execution, prisoners might be forced to kneel and offer symbolic apologies. They might be paraded with wooden plaques describing their crimes. In some cases, they'd be led to their own neighborhood as a prelude to death, allowing the community to confront them or throw things or weep or just watch. Everything was about narrative. The empire wasn't just killing someone, it was telling a story. And like all stories, there was a moral: obey, conform, don't question. And if you see someone getting sliced open in the town square, remember, that could be you. The legal system was less about resolving disputes and more about broadcasting terror. It was surveillance by spectacle, order by fear. Still think our modern justice system is harsh? At least it doesn't come with dumpling stands and front row tickets. In the next chapter, we'll meet one of the empire's most notorious cases. A man whose fall from grace was so spectacular, his death became a kind of national theater. Spoiler: it involves corruption, court intrigue, and an ending that would make Shakespeare faint. Bring a strong stomach, and maybe a notebook. There will be blood, betrayal, and bureaucracy. The rise and fall of Liu Jin, a scandal in 1,000 cuts. If Imperial China had a greatest hits of executions, Liu Jin would be the headliner. He was no ordinary man. Liu Jin was one of the most powerful figures in the Ming dynasty, and one of the most hated. A eunuch who rose from obscurity to control the heart of the empire, he became a symbol of corruption, greed, and unchecked ambition. And when he fell, he didn't just fall, he was dismantled slice by slice in front of thousands. Let's rewind to the late 1400s. Liu Jin starts out as a minor palace servant, a eunuch, castrated at a young age, supposedly destined for a life of quiet, humble service. But Liu Jin had other plans. He was clever, ambitious, and above all, loyal to the one person who mattered, the emperor. By currying favor with the future Emperor Zhengde, Liu Jin quickly rose through the ranks. He didn't just serve power, he became it. At his peak, Liu Jin wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was a shadow emperor. He controlled imperial edicts, manipulated military decisions, and amassed wealth so vast it was said he bathed in silver and dined on pearls. His network of spies, informants, and loyalists spread across the empire. He was the ultimate middleman. No order left the palace without his touch, and no favor could be granted without his nod. Of course, with power like that comes enemies. Lots of them. Scholars despised him. Officials feared him. Generals loathed him. And the public? They saw him as the face of everything rotten in government. But Liu Jin was untouchable, or so he thought. His downfall came in 1510, when Emperor Zhengde, tired of his manipulations, and perhaps just jealous of his influence, finally turned on him. Liu Jin was arrested, and the list of charges was longer than a dragon scroll. Embezzlement, treason, bribery, abuse of power, and, just for good measure, a few made-up crimes to ensure maximum disgrace. Now, remember what we learned in Chapter 3. The punishment had to match the moral weight of the crime. Liu Jin wasn't just a corrupt official. He was a corrupt official. His execution had to cleanse the empire. It had to be unforgettable. So they chose Lingchi. On the day of his death, thousands gathered in the capital. Merchants closed their stalls. Schools suspended classes. It was an event, part execution, part performance art, part moral cleansing ritual. Liu Jin was brought out, bound, stripped, and tied to a wooden frame. The executioner, hand-picked for his precision, began the slow, deliberate ritual of slicing. Historical accounts vary, but one number appears again and again: 3,357 cuts. That's not a typo. Liu Jin's body was reportedly cut over 3,000 times. The execution took hours. Some say he remained conscious for the first 1,000. Others claim he laughed maniacally until the end, either drugged or delirious. And the crowd? They cheered. They jeered. Some threw rotten food. Others took notes. For many, this wasn't just justice. It was catharsis. But it didn't end there. His body was dismembered and his remains publicly displayed. His vast fortune was seized and redistributed. His name became synonymous with treachery. For decades, parents told their children, "Behave or you'll end up like Liu Jin." He wasn't just executed. He was transformed into a cultural cautionary tale. And let's not ignore the irony. Liu Jin was a product of the very system that destroyed him. He thrived in a world where proximity to power was everything, where loyalty trumped merit, and where fear kept the machinery of empire running smoothly. His rise was fueled by the same imperial structure that demanded his blood. He played the game, and when he lost, the game played him. In a modern context, Liu Jin's story would read like a political thriller. The insider who flew too close to the sun, the Machiavellian fixer who built an empire within an empire, But in Imperial China, there were no resignations, no quiet retirements. There was only the blade. So next time you see a powerful figure get taken down, the media, stripped of titles, dragged through scandal, paraded on every platform, remember, we still love a good downfall. We still crave public reckonings. We still watch, we still judge, we still share. Liu Jin just had the misfortune of living in an era where the cancel button came with knives. Coming up in Chapter 5, ever wonder what would happen if you lived under the system? Let's put ourselves in the stocks and take a stroll through absurd empathy, modern analogies, and the terrifying possibilities of moral absolutism. What if it were you? Absurd empathy and modern echoes. Let's play a little game. It's morning. You're sipping your overpriced oat milk latte, scrolling through your phone, and you see it, a breaking story. Someone in your office leaked confidential files. The comments are already brutal. People are outraged. Someone posts their home address. Within minutes, they've lost their job, their accounts are hacked, and their name becomes a trending hashtag. You sip your coffee and think, yikes, glad it's not me. Now replace Twitter with a town square. Replace hashtags with bamboo placards. Replace a digital mob with your actual neighbors. And the punishment? Let's say it involve a rope, a platform, and a very sharp knife. Welcome to Chapter 5, where we take a long, uncomfortable look at what it would be like if you, the mildly forgetful, occasionally sarcastic modern citizen, were dropped into the Ming Dynasty's justice system. Let's say you forgot to file a report on time. In 2025, your boss sends a passive-aggressive email. In 1525, the imperial magistrate declares that your negligence disrupted the harmony of the local grain supply, and suddenly you're hauled into court for dereliction of civil duty. The judge is not a judge as we know it, but a scholar bureaucrat in long robes who takes his moral authority more seriously than you take your Wi-Fi password. You attempt to explain yourself. There was a flood, your ox died, Mercury was in retrograde. Doesn't matter. The court finds you guilty. Not just legally, but morally. Your failure was not a mistake. It was a sign of inner rot. Your punishment? Let's say you're paraded through the streets wearing a shame mask shaped like a donkey's head. Children throw fruit. You're made to kneel outside the local temple for 72 hours, while citizens are invited to lecture you on virtue. And if your offense had higher stakes, say, challenging your superior's authority, now we're talking caning, forced labor, maybe even exile, or worse. If your critique was interpreted as subversion, you're a candidate for Lingchi. Absurd? Yes, but not far off from how social control worked. The imperial system didn't distinguish much between public failure and moral sin. They were one and the same. You didn't just mess up, you had to atone. And if we're honest, brutally honest, we haven't changed all that much. Today, we love watching public apologies. We dissect them for tone, word choice, sincerity. Was it enough? Did they own it? Did they cry? We demand retribution. Brands must drop them. Projects must be canceled. Friends must unfollow. And if they try to come back too soon, that's another offense. In other words, we replace stocks and gallows with likes, shares, and ratios. The spectacle is digital. The punishment is social death. And while no one's physically flaying anyone, hopefully, the psychological effect is hauntingly similar. You might argue, but people today have a voice. They can respond. True, but so could the condemned in ancient China, right before their tongue was cut out for blasphemy. Speech has always been risky. What about nuance? What about intent? What if you just made a bad joke? Well, let's not forget, people in Imperial China were executed for poems. Literal poems. Write one bad verse, interpreted the wrong way, and suddenly you're standing on a platform next to an executioner with an artistic streak. Imagine you tweet something sarcastic. In 2025, you might get ratioed. In 1525, the imperial court might charge you with spreading disorder through insolence. You laugh. They sharpen their knives. And remember, the crowd matters. Public participation was crucial in both systems. Whether you're attending a hanging or hitting retweet, your action feeds a machine. You help it run. You give it purpose. Outrage isn't passive. It's performative. Now, this isn't to say we should feel bad for every public figure who gets held accountable. Liu Jin wasn't exactly an innocent bunny, but we should ask why we, as a society, crave humiliation as a form of justice, why we prefer spectacle over reconciliation, why we celebrate pain as proof that someone learned their lesson. Because the truth is, deep down, we're not that different from the citizens watching Lingchi. We're just wearing different clothes, holding different tools, and pretending we're better because the blood is metaphorical. So, next time you watch someone go down in flames online, ask yourself, are you watching justice, or are you just enjoying the show? Coming up in Chapter 6, we bring the knife full circle, from ritual death to digital downfall, and explore how history's cruelest punishments still echo in the way we judge, punish, and cancel each other today. It's time for the punchline. And yes, there will be blood. From blood to bandwidth, the final cut. Here we are, the final chapter, the last cut. We've marched through blood-soaked history, dissected ancient justice like a frog in a high school lab, and realized, horrifyingly, that maybe we haven't evolved as much as we thought. So now, let's put the dagger down or the phone, whichever hurts more, and talk about what this all really means. Because let's face it, this story isn't just about the past. It's a reflection of the now. Ancient Chinese executions, especially the spectacular horror Lingchi, weren't just punishments. They were performances. They were meant to instruct, entertain, warn, and intimidate. The empire needed obedience, and nothing said, obey, like watching someone get shaved into slices in the town square. Fast forward a few centuries, and we're still doing it, just with better lighting and comment sections. Today's executions come in pixels. They come in the form of mass call-outs, expose threads, virality with vengeance. We've traded bamboo frames for screen time, shackles for screenshots, but the choreography is eerily familiar. The discovery, the outrage, the gathering crowd, the moral posturing, the symbolic punishment, and finally the erasure. Sound familiar? Public shaming is the oldest crowdsourced justice system on Earth, and we brought it into the digital age with the same theatrical flair as the Qing dynasty. The hashtags are our execution gongs. The replies? Our jeering mob. The trending tab? A digital guillotine. We want a spectacle, and we want it fast. We want remorse served hot. We want groveling apologies, tears if possible, and maybe a career sacrifice or two for dessert. What we don't want: complexity, nuance, redemption arcs. Boring. Sure, we remove the blood, or have we? Because let's not forget, psychological trauma is real. A digital witch hunt can ruin lives, careers, families. And just like in ancient China, it's rarely about justice. It's about fear, social control, making sure no one steps out of line. We say we hate authoritarianism, but we cheer when someone is digitally dismembered for a mistake. We say we believe in rehabilitation, but we screenshot apology for memes. We say we're progressive, but deep down we're still peeking through the crowd, craning our necks to see the final blow. This isn't to say that accountability doesn't matter. Of course it does. But we've blurred the line between justice and vengeance, between consequence and theater, between a society that learns and one that just punishes. So what's the lesson from all this gore and drama? It's this: humans love stories, and we love roles. Heroes, villains, martyrs, monsters. The Imperial Court gave us villains and flayed them before our eyes. Today, we do the same, one viral moment at a time. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop playing executioner and start playing something harder: human. Maybe justice isn't a blade. Maybe it's a conversation. And maybe, if we're lucky, the next time someone stumbles, we'll reach out a hand instead of sharpening a knife. Now, if you made it this far without fainting, vomiting, or canceling your own internet access out of sheer existential dread, congratulations. You've survived the journey. But before you go, here's your own little moral test. Like, subscribe, comment, or, we might have sent a few officials to your house with questions about your digital disobedience. Just kidding. Or am I? This has been the terrifying executions of the Chinese Empire that you've never heard of. And remember, history doesn't just repeat itself. Sometimes it goes viral.